Hey everybody, welcome back to our usual podcast. My name is Patrick Tan, the General Counsel for ChainArgos, the blockchain intelligence firm that brought you such hits as the 2-month-long Forbes investigation of the Railgun protocol and how the Digital Currency Group might have received fees that could potentially have been connected with laundering money for North Korea, and also the Binance BUSD unbacking by $1.4 billion. We just keep the hits coming.
Shorten the intro.
With me, as usual, every week, Jonathan Reiter, our CEO and Chief Data Scientist, as well as Sourpuss to shorten the intro. Now, this week, what do we have? We're going to talk to you this week about Hyperliquid, the Lido DAO ruling, and we're going to talk about Starling Bank. That's a British bank, is that correct?
Yeah,
That's a British bank that you guys will find strong parallels with the other banks that have failed in similar fashion back in the U.S.
We didn't fail, but it suffered.
It failed to do the right thing.
Okay.
So let's talk about Hyperliquid. Hyperliquid is a blockchain, as I understand.
Well, okay, so they've announced that they're a new type of blockchain with an integrated DEX, whatever. What's interesting about Hyperliquid is not that they have the usual features of, being a high throughput, decentralized order book trading system, DEX, whatever. It's that the system is, and this has been commented on by people from all sort of sides of the issue on Twitter and otherwise. The system is just a centralized exchange that happens to say that it uses a blockchain. So it's there may be a blockchain in there. It's not clear, but it's closed source, and participation in the network is well, I would say invite only, but I don't believe anyone's been invited. So it's just run by the team. And then I'm just going to read here from the API documentation, because there is an API, but as you'll see in a moment, only sort of. There are some big features that are not yet done, including EVM block explorer, RPC queries with the non-latest block number, and integration with other L1 states, with other stuff. So what those mean are that there isn't a real explorer, and while there is an API through which you can query data from the blockchain, such as it is, it only allows you to query data for the most recent block. I did try to do this, and indeed, you can get the latest block number, and so long as that's the latest block number, you can get some data about that block. Okay. That's less data than stock market, futures market, whatever.
Put that in context, it means that historical transactions...
You can't query anything. Yeah. So it's, even if there is a blockchain somewhere, and it's not clear that there is, maybe there is.
You'll sense it.
Yeah, you can't do anything with that information. You can't get, for example, a chain of hashes, one per block, forming a blockchain. There's none of that data is available. There is something that's kind of like an explorer they have that lets you look at the order book and transactions, but then if you click on most of the links for particular transaction hashes and account numbers and the rest of it just generates errors. So we talked about this earlier. Cardano has an explorer. It's not the most reliable explorer you've ever used. You click on addresses and it'll generate errors. You have to click refresh a couple times, and usually very recent transactions are missing, but it'll get there eventually. This thing is just broken.
Broken.
To be fair, they claim they are not yet done. So
not broken, feature.
Maybe it's not finished yet. So it's interesting that you can participate in the network by running a binary.
Mm-hmm.
So they just give you the compiled code, but you can't actually retrieve any information from that. Okay. Fine.
Yeah. What would be the point of that?
Yeah. And actually, that didn't even really work. So there was a test net you could sort of run, and then when they went to mainnet, they didn't update the instructions, and you can't really connect to it. So it's whether or not there is a blockchain somewhere, this just seems to be a bunch of people running an exchange by themselves. Which is interesting.
Which seems to be okay these days.
And the token that was airdropped, so there's a token that was airdropped, a bunch of value, whatever, that's where this. It seems like people could connect to the, exchanges could connect to the network as far as token deposits and withdrawals or trading the tokens somewhere, right? But not really an open system. So, okay, that's interesting. They have RPC nodes that you can query and execute transactions on. So you can deposit and withdraw to your own account. You can transfer other accounts. That works fine. Just like Interactive Brokers, this Chicago Mercantile Exchange, whatever. There's a trading API that works. But the blockchain part, the historical data and verified whatever, no. You could argue that because you can transact in your own account, as long as you can check your own balance and it matches your own balance, it's all good. That's not really the point. Okay. I mean, for example, if you said you were going to pay me, I couldn't confirm that your account had enough money in it.
Yeah, I know. But what would be the point of that?
I can confirm that the money arrived, sort of, but I can't do anything in advance, which, I mean, maybe financially that's not necessary.
I mean, it feels at this stage that we're at the stage where nobody even bothers to pretend anymore. Just do whatever you want.
It is not like, I mean, some of the branding's somewhat misleading, puffery, but yeah, this really does feel like pushing it about as far as you can when you just launch a closed source blockchain with no explorer or participation in the network and no historical data retrieval API at all.
Because nobody cares.
Well, if people use that, clearly they don't care. This is not a legal question. This is this is a statement about the world. So that's interesting. You can't really get much further away from. You can't troll any harder than this, right? Or I can't think of any way to troll harder than this.
It's entertaining. Okay, Lido DAO Ruling. We read it. We actually read it some time ago.
This is a couple weeks ago. 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. We read it some time ago, but we haven't had room in the regular programming to cover it, such as it is. But interesting. Definitely some interesting observations. Let's talk about the partnership ones.
We give a high-level summary, then you can do that.
Yeah.
So somebody is trying to sue the Lido DAO for their losses.
Correct.
Right. And this is an initial. This person claims they have losses. None of that's litigated, and there's a whole group, mostly VC investors, backing the project that they want to sue, or that they have sued, that they want to continue to sue. And those people have said we're not members of some Lido DAO legal thing that you can sue. They put forth a number of arguments, one of which is essentially Lido DAO doesn't exist, or doesn't exist as a thing that's suable. And then this is a ruling on whether or not Lido DAO could reasonably be considered to be a thing that it's worth trying to sue. You have to prove the existence of it, whatever, and whether these people could plausibly be members of that.
Yeah.
So it's not on the merits of the lawsuit. It's I'm accusing the Lido DAO of doing something, and these people saying it's not us. Or it's the new phone who dis.
Yeah.
So, sorry. This is a discussion of whether or not Lido DAO can exist, does exist, if these people could be members.
So let's break it down to a couple of simple points. I think the first one is, was there some kind of partnership, and how, and for those of you who are not familiar with such legal concepts, like how would a partnership be construed in a legal sense, even if you don't have a formal partnership? Can the law actually construe a partnership even though you don't have any formal documentation?
So what is the legal thing?
What is the legal thing? Yeah.
Opposing in court, asking to do something.
Yeah, and then it goes through a little bit on what is sort of requisite to be seen as actively participating in the partnership. Interestingly, one of those parties that's being sued, Dolphin, I think.
Well, it's a complicated one. So this group, Dolphin, he's going to talk about, they claim that Lido DAO isn't a thing, and they're appearing on Lido DAO's behalf to defend the position that Lido DAO isn't legally accountable for anything. It doesn't really exist.
But how can something that doesn't exist for the purposes of denying?
I mean, this is a little bit complicated because somebody has to show up, otherwise
Isn't
you
that
get
a
default.
God thing where if God doesn't exist, then something
This is not. So the court has before it someone asserting a Lido DAO thing exists and has members and being sued, and if no one ever shows up, they'll just get a default judgment against that thing.
Yeah.
So one of the members sort of is appearing on behalf of this thing saying, look, we're not a member of this, but just our position is that you can't sue this thing, and this thing can't show up as a result. And their claim is that Lido is just software, and the judge addresses that, I think, directly by saying...
So Dolphin argues that Lido is just autonomous software that runs without human management. Specifically, according to Dolphin, Lido is the Lido system identified in the complaint is not owned or operated by any particular entity or group that is not authoritative or exclusive. And then the judge says, but Lido's alleged actions are not those of an autonomous software program. They are the actions of an entity run by people. It makes decisions through token holder votes, maintains a treasury where it keeps its retained percentage of staking rewards, and has hired over 70 employees.
I think this sentence
this sentence is, Samuels is not suing that protocol. He's suing the entity that operates the particular Lido deployment.
So the claim, so there is software, and you can't sue software in the same way that you can't sue clouds, right? But you can sue a particular deployment of software and the people around it, or at least plausibly you can, right? This is something that's come up many times. Writing software and deploying software are not the same thing.
Different.
You can't sue a printed document. You can sue an operating system with operators. The Tornado Cash thing was about whether or not there's much legal personhood to systems that don't have owners and operators.
This footnote is interesting as well. The judge says Dolphin is wrong that Lido is not a legal entity. Moreover, Samuels, who is the plaintiff in this case, has pled sufficient facts to show that his claim arises out of Lido's minimum contacts with the United States, which is all that is required given the Securities Act provides for nationwide personal jurisdiction over anyone with such contacts. Now, I want to just be clear that this is not a judgment, a substantive judgment. This is just, can this thing proceed?
Well, it's a substantive judgment that Lido DAO is plausibly a thing.
Yes.
And that you can't say a governance procedure for on-chain whatever software doesn't have legal personhood. It is a judgment that it does have the capacity to enter into contracts and be a thing.
But what I want to be very, very clear about is that none of this has precedential value, because all this is saying is that there is something here to litigate.
Well, no, it absolutely has precedential value.
No.
If somebody else wants to claim that their DAO doesn't have any legal existence.
But that you could say that this gives you precedent to say that there is something to sue.
Yeah.
But what some of the opinions that are added onto it to justify why this case should be allowed to proceed would be sufficient in cases where you try to file a motion to dismiss, but they would not be the same as providing a ruling on some of the actions that they do.
There's no discussion of the merits in this case.
Not the merits of the case. That's why. But it's still nonetheless interesting to see what the judge.
But they highlight specifically California's rule on partnerships is
well established,
and it's pretty similar to where it is everywhere.
Yeah.
Which is, if two or more people come together and make an agreement to do something, they have a partnership, whether or not they intended to have a partnership.
Or even if they actually had any kind of agreement verbally or formally.
Yeah.
You can communicate in a variety of ways. You see this a lot in antitrust law as well, where the antitrust authorities can actually construe that there has been a cartel or collusion amongst all the major players in the market, even if there is no overt communication. So, for instance, let's say now if I own a gas station in a small town, and there are like 3 other gas station owners, and all of us, every time somebody hikes a price, we follow.
Well, I mean, okay, you'd have to establish more facts then.
But that's sufficient that contributes to the
well, okay, sorry, but I mean that's a bit off point. So, but the key observation for people here is, if a group of people, 2 or more, whatever, make an agreement to do something, verbal, written, doesn't matter, a partnership was formed.
No, what I'm saying is that you don't even need that.
No, I understand.
Agreement.
But here you have an agreement. So
yeah, here you have an agreement.
But
all I'm saying is that in cases the law may actually
you can infer an existence
of partnership, even if there's no.
And the reason the law is this way, that otherwise, if you have to intend to form a partnership, right? It's clear how you can evade liability for almost anything by just not doing the documentation, right? So the reason it's set up this way, everyone is what's known as joint and severally liable, which means every member is 100% liable for everything, and the enforcement is done against one guy, and then one guy or gal, and then they collect from everybody else. That's what joint and several means, right? You can be held accountable individually for everything, because that's the only way to catch attempted evasion, by not having an agreement, right? If you have an agreement, there's an agreement. If you don't have an agreement, you're just all responsible for everything gets sorted out later. This is very well established for centuries, all in many different versions of common law.
It's an interesting situation, because it's not uncommon for like DAOs to have token holders delegate the authority or the votes to just delegate all of it, so somebody else makes the decision for them. I don't know if that would be. I think it sounds like. I don't know if that would be sufficient to.
Well, I mean, there are a number of structures out there proposed by, whatever, worked on by. I don't mean pushed in a negative connotation, by different lawyers working on these things, and the sort of objective a lot of the time is to put in place enough legal structure to say everyone here intends to have a multi-party arrangement involving a bunch of people, and what we intend to be the contract is the code that is at address whatever controlled by. So while it may not be the case that generically code is law, you're able to say the governing documents of our partnership are the software at X, right? You can do that to some extent. Anybody that's ever signed an apartment lease knows that, waive things to the greatest extent allowable by law. You can't normally waive absolutely everything. So this is saying that, you can infer the existence of that. If there's no paperwork, it's going to be pretty general. If there is paperwork, then you overlap the paperwork with what actually happened and figure it out. So this is just intended to show here. This is so Lido has a governance token, LDO, and then staked ETH is the product there. So this is volumes of the governance token, and the whole point here is simply that whatever the Lido DAO is, in fact, there are two different Lido DAOs, and it's a whole mess with an Oracle DAO and a whatever. But there's a fair number of people participating with the token and transacting the token. This isn't voting. This is total token holders. Whether you have to vote to be a member, just a token holder, it's all complicated stuff to litigate. This is just saying there's a lot going on here. And then these are users of staked ETH in the protocol. So Lido is a staking protocol. Effectively, the people managing this token, these are the largest senders and receivers of that token, and you see big exchanges and whatnot here. They are managing a thing where the assets under management are listed by this staked ETH. And you can similarly see, these are in ETH amounts, right? So 16 million ETH is a lot. There's huge numbers all over DeFi. It's a big asset all over the place. So it's not the case that, there are almost 10,000 active addresses in this month, unique recipients. So maybe there's 10,000 members of this DAO, maybe not really clear. No one's asserting that they're all members. In this case, because it's a lawsuit and the guy wants money, he's just named a couple of large, well-funded investment management companies. And again, joint and several means, say there's 1 billion members, and you find one guy with $1 billion, you can get the judgment for $1 billion against them, and then they have to collect the 999 million from everybody else. It's joint and several for that reason, because otherwise it's a trapdoor out of this system.
Also, partnerships are a little bit different from, say, a corporation, in that partnerships do come with personal liability.
So the default position, we should have mentioned that. Most people think of limited liability partnerships. But of course the default position, again, for what should now be obvious reasons, is unlimited liability. You have to put in place documentation explaining what the limits are to get the limits, because you can't by default have limits or you're just not liable for anything.
Like an LLP or an LLC, these are vehicles that have limited liability, and they have formal documentation where the assets of the partners are limited to a certain amount. But if you don't have anything like that in place, the liability is unlimited. Things like this is a common vehicle as well in many common law jurisdictions, but like a sole proprietorship, I generally don't advise clients to set up that kind of structure.
Well, so a sole proprietorship is like an unlimited liability general partnership with yourself as the only member.
Correct.
Right?
So a general partnership would be also unlimited liability for all the partners.
And these things are tested in law for centuries. In much of the world, law firms were required to be unlimited liability partnerships for, again, what should be fairly obvious reasons. And so this is stuff where there's centuries of precedent on how this stuff works.
Even now, where you have law firms which are like law corporations and stuff like that with limited liability and stuff like that, there are many strong caveats to that. You can't just say it's completely, not my business, because you have professional rules that you have to adhere to.
So that's not to say that all of this is very easy, although the judge is reasonably dismissive of many of these arguments in a way that sounds like they're very confident. It's to say that once you've fallen into the category of being this type of partnership, there's extreme clarity on how the rules work. Extreme clarity. These are heavily litigated things for a long time. Most businesses were organized as partnerships of some sort for centuries, and it's only fairly recently that public listed companies are the predominant form of large business. All small businesses are run as some kind of a limited liability venture among a bunch of people. So it's an interesting little tidbit.
All right, so moving on, finally, Starling Bank.
So Starling Bank was known as a challenger bank in the UK. Smaller bank, no branches, online only, whatever. And what's interesting about Starling Bank is that it was fined £29 million, given a discount off of a £40 million statutory whatever amount fine for cooperation and admission of guilt and the rest of these things. That's the way it works. And I don't know if it's the United Kingdom or England because the regulatory system is a bit different for different parts of the UK. Anyway, and you see a lot of echoes of what happened at Silvergate Signature Bank and other smaller U.S. banks that are starting to, Silicon Valley, whatever, explode. And I think there's some lessons to be learned here. So I'm just going to read a couple of tidbits from the settlement, the FCA's statements. So Starling also identified in January 2023 that since the implementation of its financial sanctions screening framework in 2017, 7 years earlier, its automated screening system had only been screening the names of new and existing customers against a fraction of the names on the consolidated list. The consolidated list is functionally the OFAC list. It's not exactly the same, but it's the British version of something like that. As a result, over the relevant period, Starling opened 54,000 accounts for 49,000 higher risk customers in breach of the terms of the earlier agreement they made with the regulator. So they'd found trouble repeatedly, promised to do better, and not done a very good job about it. So that's obviously something that is reminiscent of the take our lumps quotes from the Silvergate Bank documentation. And Signature similarly has some problems. And then there's the FCA order is quite mean to the bank. And I have to say the British English that's used here is about as aggressive as official government British English can ever be. Right? So Starling's senior management as a whole lacked the experience and capability to effectively implement the agreement. That's about as mean as the British government can be about anyone, right? It doesn't, they were inexperienced when dealing with significant regulatory changes. Starling's senior management lacked awareness of the impact of the agreement they made and the seriousness of not complying with the agreement they made. That, from an American English perspective, Australian English perspective, and often other countries translated, that doesn't sound so bad, right? For the British government, that's brutal, right? Plus the 29 million pounds. Now, the most important and interesting observation here is, I think, very specific to the technical operations of the bank. So they've already insulted senior management as not knowing how to run a bank. In particular, the engineering teams who were responsible for making the key changes to Starling's systems and controls to implement the VREC, the agreement, were not informed of the existence of the VREC, the agreement, or the seriousness and potential consequences of not implementing the VREC appropriately. So that's a direct statement that the people, the developers, the engineers, the software folks, whatever, weren't told how badly the severity of the trouble the bank was in. They were not told what needed to be done to remedy it. They were not told what the bank had promised the government it would do to remedy it. And clearly then they were not told the consequences of their failure to do the things they promised the government that they would do. You see a little bit of this again in the Silvergate case where they either we fix the problem or we haven't, right? But here it seems like the engineering team, maybe at some point somebody went to them and said, have you fixed this? And they said, here's our priority list. It's not on, I don't know what you're talking about, right? And you sort of feel bad for the engineers that they're not going to do work they were never told existed. I mean, that's not a criticism of them. And you see this, I think, a lot, and this is going to come up in cases for a while now, where there is a legal problem, a legal challenge, a lack of understanding, something that's discovered, the system works a certain way, whatever, a use case that wasn't contemplated for, or frankly, just a mistake was made when it was set up because people misunderstood, assumptions were made. And when it becomes clear that there's a problem, if you don't tell the technical team what the problem is in both business terms and technical terms, and square that difference, right? So, basic example, if management says, we're concerned that this is custodial, and you go back and forth, and the developers say it's not custodial, you're like, oh, we're good. You need to make sure you're both operating on the same definition of custodial. In particular, if this inquiry began because a lawyer got pinged about something perhaps being custodial, the definition the person asking them was using maybe should come into the conversation, and you have to do a little back and forth. We'll have some work on how we think a lot of non-custodial stuff is more branding than functionally accurate. This is a perfect example where the software developers, they're engineers, they have a piece of software, and you call this software X. Okay, it's X, right? Everyone has had this problem where if you work at a large company with own developed software, whatever, even you try to get help from Microsoft, whatever it is, and you think you're filing a bug report, and the response that comes back from the person is a description of how the system works. And it's frustrating because, yes, I agree that's how the system works. It's wrong. Oh, no, but that's how the system works. Well, the system's wrong. Well, of course the system's not wrong because it's the system, but it's not what I wanted it to do. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of that. Here, well, this is how the system works. It's what the bank told us to build. Yes, but management as a whole lacked the experience and capability to effectively implement the agreement. So what management told you to do was wrong. Now, to be fair, they only got fined in the end about 10% of their annual profits. They have millions of customers, so these 50,000 customers are. It's not like their core business is alleged to be dodgy, whatever, banking, but also they definitely did have some bad customers. I mean, look, it's not great. It's not perfect. We'll see. But it's great here because they've directly called them out for not even telling the developers what they had to do.
Yeah, I think we'll
You
see.
can't blame the devs.
Yeah, you can't blame the devs. I mean, if the devs didn't know.
In the United States, the lawyers will find a way to blame the devs.
Unfortunately.
In the United Kingdom, the lawyers aren't going to be accountable. The whole setup is different. In-house counsel, everything's very, very different in the UK versus the US. In the US, if the lawyers work for the company, they may have a problem, and they'll find a way to blame the devs.
Yeah.
In the UK, the lawyers won't have a problem because they're not probably formally employees of the company anyway. So, they don't have to blame the devs.
And on that,
Senior management's clearly being blamed. I mean, the government's calling them incompetent, inexperienced.
Inexperience. And
Lacked experience and capability.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty harsh.
On that note, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all your likes and subscribes and comments. We appreciate it. Otherwise, have a great weekend. We'll be taking a break from next week's episode, but we'll be back the following week, and then we'll see you then.